Welcome to the Download Show. Today's guest is someone who's walked through personal storms and come out, not just transformed, but determined to help others do the same. Aaron Pang is the founder of Transformative Purpose, a platform built on honesty, vulnerability, and the power of storytelling. After facing a terrifying health scare with his infant son, Aaron turned inward and then outward, choosing to speak publicly about what most of us are taught to hide: fear, shame, and failure. In this conversation, we dive into how those moments reshaped his identity as a father, a man, and a human being. Welcome to the show, Aaron.
Thank you so much for having me, Zach.
Yeah, so first I want to really delve into kind of your work as Transformative Purpose and kind of all the work in your books, your Unstuck books, and your executive coaching work. All that work culminates, I want to talk about how it culminates into kind of how you think about positivity now and what are you doing specifically with parents, with kids, and the general public.
Thanks. It's a great question. Honestly, I think positivity is something that I grew up with, and I didn't even know that I had it with me until I started getting questions from a lot of corporate leaders asking me to help them build a positive culture and help their people build a positive mindset at work. And if I could, I would just take you back to, and you mentioned a couple of occasions or catalysts which had happened to my life, which sort of brought me down this path unintentionally. So in 2019, I just turned 35, and I thought I had most things that I had wanted in life. And then basically a couple of nights before my first infant son, his name is Finn, turned 3 months old, there was just one evening around 10 p.m. in the evening, my wife, Camby, and I were binging on Netflix, like most of us, and heard her scream in the bedroom, and I just went inside, and I lifted my son up, and the next thing which happened was I had to save him for the next 5 minutes. So he had all this white froth just coming out from his mouth, and I checked his mouth, there was nothing there. I didn't know first aid. I was panicking, obviously, screaming, yelling, and even asked my wife to go to our neighbors to see if anybody knew first aid. We're so frightened that none of us thought about calling the emergency hotline. And that whole experience lasted for 5 minutes to a point where his limbs were not responding. His whole body just changed color from normal to reddish pink to purple and then blue. And then during that experience, I remember he looked past me, and I thought that was it. I thought that was the end of his life, and a father couldn't save his son. So, and luckily he made it. He survived the episode and finished six and a half now. So I'm really grateful for the experience. But it wasn't just that which happened in 2019. There were a bunch of other things. Using Job's word, sometimes we try to connect the dots looking forward, but the only way that we can connect the dots is by looking backward. And so the last 6 years, I've really done a lot of self-reflection, writing and rewriting about what had happened in 2019 and even before that. And apart from what happened to my son,
Wait. Lost him. Let's see if he comes back.
hey, sorry, not sure what happened.
Hello. Yeah,
Hi.
I think
Just got cut off.
that's okay. I think that's fine. We'll just keep on. So where did you drop off? I actually kind of didn't hear for a little bit, and then it kind of stopped off.
So I was talking about, I guess, where did I drop off? I was talking about the suffocation and how Camby and I were just, binging on Netflix, and then all of a sudden I heard a scream, went into the bedroom, and the next thing I know was I had to save a dying baby for the next 5 minutes, and it was a close call, and to a point where I just thought I lost him. And during those 5 minutes, it was the longest 5 minutes of my life, and I had all these crazy thoughts that was happening in my head. A father just killed his own son and not being able to save him, and it wasn't just the only thing that happened in 2019. And I think you were in Hong Kong in 2019. We had a social movement, and right about April, May, I decided to go on a news detox because there was just so much happening in the news outlet, and that was just making me very unhappy on top of what I just experienced with my son. And then right about August, there was a major protest which unfolded in Hong Kong. And just before I slept, I saw one of my high school friends just post a black image, like a pitch dark black image with no context and no information on it. And it did that on Facebook. And just before I slept, I wrote what happened, ? And then went to sleep. And like I said, because I went on news detox, I had no idea what was happening. And the next morning, I woke up, I was trolled on Facebook, and I got canceled from a couple of WhatsApp groups, that were formed by my former high school classmates. And then around about September, I started asking myself a lot of existential questions. Obviously, I was dealing with a lot of emotions on the back of what happened with my son. There was a lot of guilt. I didn't know whether I caused it. There was a lot of fear. I couldn't sleep for about 6 months. I would just wake up in the middle of the night, slide my fingers under his nose to make sure he's breathing and he's alive. And there's also a lot of shame because right before that happened, I remember I was very ready to be a father. I was ready to teach him all these life lessons. But then I realized that emotionally, I wasn't ready as a person. And I probably wasn't showing up the way that I wanted to show up. Like, I was definitely ready to preach and to teach him all these life lessons I just wanted to teach him. But then I think at some point I realized that I was a hypocrite. I wasn't living and breathing the skills and the life lessons that I wanted to teach him. And then because we were in such a negative state with our surrounding and the world, I just thought, I went back to a couple of people and I asked them, what do you see in Aaron? And a few of them said, oh, you're real, you're authentic, and you're positive. And I thought, if the world needed a bit of positivity, maybe I'll just use my voice and start sharing inspiration and positivity. And that was the start of my writing journey back in September 2019.
Nice. And then and how many books do you have now? You have Unstuck. I believe you have 2, and then you have a third one coming out soon as well. Yeah. And what will that be about?
So my new book is about half a year ago, I got my first book contract with Penguin Random House. I've always had a dream to become a global inspirational writer. It took about 6 years for that to happen. So my next book is about the superpower of introverts. So like I said, because of what happened, I really look back to how I grew up in Hong Kong and also spent a bit of time in Asia. And a lot of people would be surprised when I told them that I'm probably more introverted than extroverted. And I think I was more introverted because of circumstances, not because of genetic reasons. So yeah, decided to write a book to help other people, like the quiet people, to find strengths in silence. And I had a lot of those moments growing up here in Asia, and then moving overseas and coming back to Hong Kong again. And back to the book publication. So my first book was a parenting guide, and I called it The Asian Dad. And I wrote a second book about digital transformation. My third book was Unstuck, a book that I wanted to write for a very long time. And the reason for that was after I moved to Australia when I was 20, I was diagnosed with Bell's palsy, so basically a facial paralysis. It was my first time that I walked into an Australian bookstore, which is called Dimmicks, and I walked into the self-help section, and the book that I picked up at that time was Tuesdays with Maury. So if you, if you, the audience, haven't read this book, it's basically about 12 live lessons between a professor who got diagnosed with ALS and he was about to die. And one of his former students found out about this through television. So he went back to him, and the book basically documented the last 12 live lessons that this professor wanted to share with his former student. I remember I was sick, with a dysfunctional face, and I needed that dose of positivity and motivation. I read that book. And I remember there was more of a silent contract that I promised myself that, if one day I could, I would love to write a self-help book that I could help other people. I didn't know what the content would be. I didn't know what I would write. And basically it took me 15 years to, I guess, make that a reality. And that became Unstuck. Without Unstuck, I very much doubt that I'll have this contract with Penguin Random House about my next book, which is about the superpower of introverts. In a way, I think my next book is really about how I grew up and how I transformed my silence into how I was able to find strength through silence and vulnerability.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about actually something recent, the movie Adolescence on Netflix. How do you, and the premise of the book is essentially a son who's been accused of murder and how he's dealing with the recent chain of events and how his entire family, and particularly his father, is dealing with it. We talked a little about this before the interview. How do you kind of identify with this movie, and how do you react to kind of parenting and being positive, but yet, with social media and with this current age? How do you think about parenting in this new age?
Yeah, I watched that movie a few weeks ago, and it really resonates with me. And I think modern parenting is really hard. And I think someone said you and I are going to be the last generation to have experienced the world before AI came in, right? I consider us as this hybrid generation where we've seen the analog world, and then we've also seen the rise of the digital world. But unfortunately, I think the next generation is going to be brought up in an environment where they haven't even seen the beauty of living in the analog world, where we would have conversations at the dining table, for instance. It'll be phone free. There will be a lot of free play in the playground. After watching that movie, I think my reaction was, I think it wasn't a surprise to me. But like so many things with human beings, we get very reactive when we see, oh, this is real, right? But when you look around, I feel like one of the issues with parenting, and I'm also navigating this space, is we have a tendency to overly protect our children in the physical environment, but they're loosely protected in the digital environment. An example I would share with you was that I started watching superhero movies when I was in primary school, and one of which was Spider-Man, right? And as a young kid, sometimes it's very hard to distinguish what is reality and what is not reality. And it took a life lesson for me to know that I'm not a superhero. I'm not a Spider-Man. And one day I just find myself in a corridor and I try to crawl up the wall, and I broke my wrist. And that was what made me realize that I'm not a Superman. I don't have that superpower. I think the concern and worry that I have is there's so much information, there's so much rubbish on the internet that are not censored, and the wrong belief will lead people to the wrong path, right? And that's the example that I share with you. If I thought that I was a superhero, I would commit to I would try to be a superhero in some circumstances until I learned my life lesson. I realized that I'm actually not a Spider-Man. And I think depending on what kids are watching these days, my worry is that it might also influence their belief system. And if you really unpack the movies, before he committed that murder, there were already symptoms that were happening in his life, but no one was paying attention, right? It's not having friends at school, super quiet, started hiding in his bedroom and playing a lot of computer games, right? And these were the symptoms that were already emerging, but no one paid attention to it. No one intervened, right? Which led to the murder later on. So who is that to blame? Like, do we blame the kid, or do we blame that no one is paying attention, or do we blame the environment that we're creating for the next generation, and yet we're normalizing that it is okay? So that would be my view.
And how does Amron kind of run his household then? What do you suggest, or maybe not even suggest, but how do you kind of be present with, is it with your house? Is it totally a ban on mobile devices and social media? Is it really trying to be present at home? What are some of the things that you do specifically at home?
Yeah, I think it will be impossible to, we're not living in a cave, right? It'll be very hard to block off all the social media and smartphones, right? But I think as a parent, what's even more important for us is for us to walk the talk, be their model, and teach them how they can use technology with intention. So one of the things that I like to do is, so I have this thing called Digital Detox Day. So every Saturday, and my boys know about it, it's a no phone day for me. I wouldn't do anything outbound. But if there's anything inbound, then I might respond. I also empower my kids to call me out, and my elder boy, and so I left my job early last year, and one of the challenges for a lot of entrepreneurs is navigating work-life imbalances. It's hard for a lot of people, especially for working parents. But I've also empowered my kids to call me out, and they know that Saturday is a no phone day, and if they catch me using my phone, they will call out my behavior. And this is one of the motivational techniques that we can use with the children. You empower them to take responsibility for their life and for someone else's life, which is me. Other things like setting boundaries, for example, like when we dine out, when we eat at home, there's no phone is allowed on a dinner table, and I really want them to create that safe environment, that sanctuary where they understand that there's a time and place for certain things. So dining table is where we get together as a family and we chat, and we should be okay with boredom, for instance. Right, and if when I take my kids out to restaurants, we'll bring papers and pens. Yes, it means more inconvenience for parents. We have more things to pack. But then again, if we want to do things in their best interest, we also need to stop taking shortcuts. One of the phenomena that and you've probably seen it yourself, is that some parents, they're so worried that they will starve their children, they start putting their phone in front of them. Right? Instead of letting them be present and understand the feeling of hunger, they put a phone in front of them to distract them so that they could eat. Whereas my philosophy is, if they're hungry, starve them. Right? Why do you want to distract them from hunger? So, I think those are the examples that I've learned, that I try to introduce boundary. And I try to teach, I guess, kids how to use technology with intention. And back to what I was saying is, this is not about carving off all the technologies in their environment, but more so is about teaching them the benefits, like when to use technology. For instance, another example would be don't outsource our thinking to AI. I see some of my peers, they started just outsourcing everything, like the ideation and the thinking and the writing to AI. And that's going to have a huge cost on our cognitive thinking. So I think those would be, I guess, my suggestions and some of the ideas that I found useful. And hopefully that's also useful for the audience too.
And some of those ideas and tactics that you're using, right? How much actually, to be honest, is inspired from actually your past as well? Or is this something that these are kind of techniques that you picked up along the way and try to adapt to your parenting style?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both. I think because I spent so much time working with digital tech, I built my first e-commerce website when I was like 20 years ago, when nobody was talking about drop shipping and e-commerce, and we're one of the first ones to build websites back in Australia. But over the last 20 years, I think the internet is not where it is supposed to be. When the internet came out, there was a promise that we are going to democratize information. But the problem with the internet and social media was because it came out without a commercial model. So they started, like, take social media, for instance. The reason why it is so hard for people to drop their phones is because they're trying to fight for our attention and eyeballs for ads. And they started collecting our personal information. And how are they going to monetize through social media is, they want us to spend as much time as possible on the social media. They want us to get hooked. So I think because the internet and social media kind of started that way, some of the metrics like mental health, like how long our kids spending time on the apps, on their phones, these are not their KPIs. And because these are not our KPIs, and I think our job as parents is to help them understand, okay, what is the commercial model behind this? Why are they doing such thing? And then how can we help us navigate that? And I think to answer your question, I think it's a bit of both. Maybe I can probably attribute to three things. Maybe my upbringing, being in the analog environment, what I enjoy and what I didn't enjoy growing up in an Asian setting. My experience working with digital tech and how I benefited from it. But increasingly, I think internet and social media are becoming less and less productive, but more of a distraction for a lot of people. And then, like you said, I think it's doing different experiments and see what resonates with my kids and what don't, and then you sort of adapt along the way. For example, so one of the things that I try to do is get my kids to read more books. And this is trial and error, right? How do you get your kids to read more books? And for those of you who have read Atomic Habits from James Clear, you would know that the very first step to build any habit is to have cues, right? So you got to make more cues in your environment. And how do you do that? So I just put books everywhere. Instead of putting all the books neatly in their bedroom, I put them in the dining room. There are some at the desk, and there will be, in my room and that room. So you kind of make the cues more visible. And hopefully by building more cues into the environment, it will also remind them of the behavior that you want to see more of for them too.
But it's actually really interesting, kind of that perspective. And I get the whole point about kind of, the analog environment, which actually is, like you said in the beginning, it's ultra rare. And it's getting even actually more ultra rare because we are the last generation with that analog experience. But then also working with social media and working in technology, you can now also see the downfall or the pros and cons, right, of social media and really what they're trying to achieve with that. I'm going to segue this into actually that piece, kind of that social media and talk about kind of male role models. So right now in social media, there's a big rise in the characters of Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate. So a lot of males and boys are following these. Now, there's a phenomenon of say, do they not have existing male role models, which is why they're actually following these guys in social media. How do you think about kind of male role models in this day and age? How do you think male role models and masculinity should be conveyed so that young boys actually have excellent role models to model their behaviors with in the cue in the same kind of language as Atomic Habits, right, of cues, if you will.
Yep. I think the way I see masculinity is to love yourself, but also to love the other person the way they want to be loved. I think one of the issues that we've seen with societies these days is there are so many different labels. And once people think that they identify with a label, they also think that they need to manifest their identity and their behaviors according to the definitions of those labels. And I didn't know that I had an issue with masculinity until much later on in my life. So I never really spoke up to my father until I was well over 30s. And that goes back to why I said earlier on I was a really quiet kid, and because I also saw I'm really blessed and grateful for having two loving parents. But then I also saw a lot of masculinity when I was growing up, which caused my quietness, and I wouldn't voice up. I like everything that I've shared on this podcast. Not even my parents knew about it. Like having suicidal thought. My dad and mom didn't know I had self-harm and tried to kill myself when I was 14. Um, but my dad was always there for me when there were big moments, like changing me to a new school, sending me abroad. But then one of the things that I wish that could have happened more was if my dad was also there for the small moments. Because to me, um, when I was being bullied in schools, like those are the moments that I wish my parents were there. But because there were so many things that were happening back home, I just didn't feel safe to tell him. Masculinity or not, and feminism, right? When talking about this big rise in women empowerment, I'm very cautious of any extreme labeling, because I think as a human being, I think what we should do more of is being able to see the positive characteristics of both ends. Just because you are a successful woman CEO, it doesn't mean all the women will need to become a CEO. I know many women, for instance, they will be happy to spend more time with their children. But all of a sudden, you might have friends that in your circle that have become like this successful billionaire women, and they started preaching to tell you that, hey, you know what, you should spend more time, go back to the corporate world. But that's not me. Perhaps my value system is I just want to be able to spend more time with my children, right? So like you said at the show, right? You do you, I do I, and be clear with your value system. I will stay away from those labels and really go back to myself and ask myself, okay, given my life stage right now, what is my top priority? Is it entrepreneurship? Is it spending time with my family? Is it my health, right? And you kind of go from there, because that will give you a lot of excuse me, because that will give you a lot more clarity as to how you should live your life, where you should allocate your time. Yeah, and also to address your question earlier, for instance, if you want to have better quality time with your partner, with your children, like should we be using our phones when we're having meals, right? And I think it really goes back to what is your purpose, what is important to you right now, like who do you want to serve, and then you design your life accordingly.
But I like how you kind of go full circle, right? So you kind of said, in some ways, because my question was how do you deal with those type of labels and masculinity in this day and age? And you kind of say, well, basically, what's your purpose? Who do you serve? And by kind of leading the way or being an example, I think in a roundabout way, I think what you're saying is that by showing that example, your kids will model their behaviors around that.
Yeah, correct. Because there's so many theories and noises and distractions out there, right? But fundamentally, do you know what is important to you right now? And by following the masculinity label, the characteristics that are being projected, how do they serve your priorities? Right? Like, do your children even want to have a masculine parent at home? What does that mean for them? And how were you treated as a young kid? Did you like masculinity? I didn't like masculinity, right? And what is your definition of masculinity? Because your definition of masculinity will also drive your happiness. The same thing which happened to me. I thought back in the day, success was climbing up the corporate ladder, getting a bigger paycheck. And when I got all those things, I realized I still had a void after what happened to my son, because I started with the wrong definition. And the wrong definition and the wrong belief, again, will take us to the wrong path. So again, I would encourage people to really think back about, in your life, what is important. Don't just identify yourself with a label like introvert, extrovert, ambivert. Who cares, right? But fundamentally, who are you? Who is your superpower? Who do you serve? right? You go back to answer those fundamental questions. And by having clarity with those questions, that will lead you to the right solutions. That will lead you to the right people. That will lead you to the right path. And don't yeah, and never just copy someone's system and make them your own, right? Because your age is different, your family is different, right? That will be my
Okay.
tic tac.
Yep. All right. Well, on that note, thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Tac.